This week on Government Matters.
We give the attackers enough time with the tools, they're going to find vulnerabilities and find ways in. And we certainly don't want to create, one more route in for the bad guys.
The terror attacks in Paris revive an international debate over encryption. We discuss the potential pitfalls to digital backdoors.
How are you providing value that enables the government to transform its operations and achieve its mission?
It's time federal IT contractors position themselves for 2016. We head to PSC Vision for a FedTech forecast.
Choosing a health plan is sort of like going to the dentist to have a tooth pulled. No one wants to think about it or do anything about it or read those horrible details.
For feds, choosing a dental or health plan can be a real pain. We have a how-to guide for open enrollment. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. Despite a presidential veto threat, the House overwhelmingly approved a bill to suspend admissions of Syrian and Iraqi refugees. It also requires FBI background checks on migrants from those countries. This fight could impact all of government. If a veto is sustained, some Republicans want to tie the bill to must-pass spending legislation that funds government past December 11th. Megan Hughes has the latest.
The yeas are 289 and the nays are 137. The bill is passed.
The House passed what leaders call a pause. Thousands of Syrian and Iraqi refugees would be shut out of the country, while intelligence officials develop a program to certify those refugees are not threats.
Don't you think that common sense dictates that we should take a pause and get this right?
Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson says the U.S. vetting process already takes almost 2 years.
We're also talking about a class of people that are predominantly women and children.
More than 2,000 Syrian refugees already live in the U.S., and the rhetoric against them is getting heated. More than 30 governors say they won't accept any more into their states. On the campaign trail, candidate Ben Carson compared refugees to dogs, terrorists to rabid dogs.
If there's a rabid dog running around your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog, and you're probably going to put your children out of the way.
At a congressional hearing, the president of a refugee resettlement program expressed disbelief at the language being used.
I mistakenly thought that attitudes and signs like Irish need not apply, no coloreds, no Jews or dogs allowed were ugly relics buried in the past, but apparently not.
Democrats are proposing changes to a program that allows many Europeans into the U.S. without a visa. 6 of the Paris attackers were from Europe. Megan Hughes, ABC News, Washington.
In security matters, the encryption wars. The terror attacks in Paris have reopened the debate over whether and how technology companies should let governments bypass privacy controls on digital devices. Joining me with the latest is Tony Cole, Vice President and Global Government Chief Technology Officer for FireEye. Tony, before we start, I need to point something out. So far, there's no hard evidence that the terrorists in France relied on encrypted communications. That said, so-called end-to-end encryption technology is mainstream now. Who uses it and how does it work?
That's a really good question, Morris, and we're seeing more and more people actually utilize encryption from the consumer side. Governments obviously started down this path long before anybody else. We see a lot of corporate communications now actually being encrypted, and government-to-government communications are encrypted, from the U.S. and some of its allies across the world. So I think we're going to continue to see encryption ramp up since we've seen so many cyber attacks around the globe now that have had such a massive impact.
The CIA and FBI want tech companies to give them backdoor access. But Apple CEO Tim Cook argues there's no such thing as a backdoor for good guys only. The debate between privacy and security will continue for some time, Tony. I want to talk about the science. How is a backdoor built, and can it be done in a way that restricts access to government?
You know, it's a really good question as well, and quite frankly, it cannot be done, you know, where it would be restricted only to government. So we have to keep in mind that these devices will get sold, you know, to anybody that wants to buy them. If Apple or any other company implemented an encryption backdoor or an exceptional access mechanism, as some scientists like to say, then that backdoor could be examined by anybody who bought the phone. And the one thing we've found through many vulnerabilities being found in software, which is helping these some of these major cyber attacks take place, so is that if we give the attackers enough time with the tools, they're going to find vulnerabilities and find ways in. And we certainly don't want to create, you know, one more route in for the bad guys.
Basically, you can't control who has the keys, even though the key says do not copy. That's
correct.
Basically it. All right. Until recently, you needed a powerful desktop or server computer to encrypt communications. Now these tools are in the palm of your hand. That begs the question, is this technology so mainstream that bad actors can build it themselves?
You know, bad actors can build it themselves, and we also need to keep in mind, you know, one of the primary reasons it's a bad idea to actually put a backdoor into a system is because it's widespread around the globe access to tools like this. And if we go through and we actually really locked down, you know, these systems and forced companies to put backdoors in for law enforcement and intelligence agencies here in the United States, not only could we see the Snowden Prism effect where other companies outside of the United States bought other products because they don't want U.S. law enforcement having access. We also need to be concerned with the fact that many of the bad guys will just go get their encryption somewhere else, so from another company, and actually further impact U.S. businesses.
Now let's talk more about Edward Snowden. In 2013, he revealed efforts by the National Security Agency to break encryption technology. That was years ago. The private sector keeps pushing the encryption envelope at the speed of light. Considering these advances, is government fighting a losing battle? Is encryption technology getting more difficult to break?
I think it is getting more difficult to break, you know, and it's going to continue to go down that path. If we look at the possibilities with quantum, you know, mechanics and quantum physics and that being applied to cryptography, it's going to become more and more difficult to break it. So there are multiple routes, though, going around the way something is encrypted and actually finding backdoors and side access into encryption technologies. So there are still going to be methods that are going to be successful, but nevertheless, I think the difficulty and complexity will continue to increase.
A very timely discussion. Tony Cole with FireEye, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's take a look now at some of this week's agency headlines. U.S. Chief Information Officer Tony Scott says he wants to fill about 10,000 cyber openings across government next year. Scott also touted shared services during a keynote speech at FedScoop's Fed Talks in D.C. Agencies really stepped up their use of plain language in 2015. The grades are in, and the Center for Plain Language did not issue any Ds or Fs. In fact, a record number of agencies scored B or higher. The Social Security Administration led the pack. It earned an A+. The National Institutes of Health says it will permanently stop using chimpanzees for biomedical testing. NIH will remove its 50 remaining chimps out of labs and relocate them to sanctuaries inside the U.S. Animal rights groups celebrated the decision. We'll turn to tech straight ahead on Government Matters. Despite talk of another government shutdown, technology contractors have reason to be optimistic. Experts say civilian IT spending will rise in 2016. We'll take an in-depth look at the issues, budgets, and priorities for a rapidly changing environment next. For the first time since 1996, the Office of Management and Budget has legislation to drive major change in federal IT. But FITARA is only part of a continuous focus on performance. Robert Haas says industry will need to get on board or be left behind in 2016. He sat down with our Diane Cho at the Vision Conference in Falls Church, Virginia.
Robert, you found that continuing resolutions are complicating investment planning. How so?
Agency planners, as well as the program managers themselves, need some level of consistency to make multi-year decisions when they're making their budgets and setting the plans for the next number of months as well as into the future. And without that visibility, they don't know whether or not they can execute their plans as they originally designed them, or whether they're going to have to pare back, or whether they're even able to grow a little bit faster and deploy things a little bit faster. And that becomes important depending on the type of mission that they're supporting or the particular crisis they're trying to avoid.
What are some of the main issues that you've seen?
The timelines are often compressed into less than optimal time frames. The second thing is that they don't have visibility to provide the staff at the right times. And finally, the acquisition folks are challenged during boom and bust cycles that result from the inability to plan and forecast procurements.
According to your study, choosing between savings and value trade-offs is pretty difficult for agencies. So what does that mean?
Think about your home budget, for example. Maybe you would prefer to have a nicer car now and maybe have a new car, but you can't afford a new car, so you buy a used car that maybe breaks down a little bit more often. And that's sort of the trade-off that the agency planners are, and even some of their budget folks are having to make. They cannot always buy the new model, the one that is maybe at the forefront of technology, the one that might be a little bit better for them long term. They have to make do with what they have, and that's really the challenge and the trade-off that they've got.
CIO's top priorities are modernizing their IT infrastructure and cybersecurity, and if agencies spend more on those areas, what do they spend less on?
So that's the real challenge that they're faced with. Part of it is that they're hoping to retire some of these older systems. The second thing that they spend less on is coming through the acquisition reforms. You're starting to see consolidation of contracts, and particularly things like agency centralized software or laptop purchases, and you're starting to see those things, and I say starting to, over the last handful of years that's been occurring, but those savings are being taken and converted back into new program spend.
Going on to the budget, have we passed the inflection point? Is the IT budget going to grow over the next 5 years, do you think?
From our analysis, we believe that we have passed that inflection point. You really only know that looking backwards at the actual spend, but we believe, given the trend that we've seen through FY14 and FY15, and now our projections for FY16 and beyond, that we have passed that curve, and the data seem to indicate that, as well as some of the planning activities that we're starting to hear about within the government themselves, suggesting that the people inside the government believe that inflection point has passed as well.
Is there a difference between IT spending on the defense and civilian sides of government, or not really?
There is, and that has to do with a number of the pressures that each group of agencies faces. On the defense side, they've been pressured a lot because of the drawdown that we've seen over the last number of years. IT, along with the other portions of the defense budget, has been under a lot of pressure. Conversely, on the civilian side, we've seen a growth in the last number of years in the civilian spending, and that hasn't been present on the DoD side.
There are significant policy questions surrounding cloud adoption, mobility, big data, and the Internet of Things that remain unanswered. Is that a problem?
It is. From a technology adoption standpoint, there are a lot of promises that are being offered by those new technologies that you have, not the least of which is cost savings and flexibility and critical information sharing among users within the government and the public. The challenge is making sure that the trust of the government is maintained, and that the security of the information that is being shared isn't compromised. And so doing this in a deliberate fashion is at the core of the challenge that's faced by the decision makers. Are their security standards strong enough? If they believe they're strong enough, does everybody believe that they're strong enough because they're still liable for that data?
And of course, the $80 billion question here, how should companies plan for the year ahead?
Well, we believe that there's reason for cautious optimism. The government is, as we said, we believe it has turned the corner in terms of the bottom of the IT spending challenge. However, that doesn't mean that there's a lot of money out there. The government is trying to use its money judiciously, and from a planning perspective, companies really need to think about a handful of things. First of all, that the challenges faced from a fiscal environment are not just a 1 year or 2 year challenge, that they're going to be with us for the long term. The second issue is that the government has priorities in terms of spending from an acquisition standpoint. They're going to try to consolidate contracts They are going to try to ensure that small businesses get a fair shake in the competitive environment, and there's going to be focus on also reducing non-performing contracts. So if you're impacted by any of those areas, you need to think about how that might affect your business. Finally, maybe the most important thing to think about is how are you providing value that enables the government to transform its operations and achieve its mission? Because that's going to be one of the biggest selling points over the next number of years.
All right, Robert Haas, thank you again for joining us on Government Matters.
Thank you very much.
Speaking of selling points, it's open enrollment season, and we want to save you money on health insurance. I should really credit Geico there. Well, the clock is ticking, a perfect time for our how-to guide for open enrollment. That's straight ahead on Government Matters. In Management Matters, a how-to guide for open enrollment. 8 million people sign up each year for the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, or FEHB. They spend a total of about $50 billion on 250 plans. It's a great system, outperforming Medicare and private plans in coverage, cost control, and consumer satisfaction. But the FEHB can be confusing. For more, I'm joined by Walton Francis, economist, policy analyst, and author of Checkbook's 2016 Guide to Health Plans for Federal Employees. Walt, before we get into the nitty-gritty, give us the overall view. Are prices going up this year, and what's different about the FEHB?
Prices always go up at least a little bit. This year it's about 7% on average. There are a couple of really interesting and money-saving things happening this year. One of them is the new Self+1 enrollment category for couples or single parents with one child, which will, in almost all plans, will save you a couple $100 a year. Not to sneeze at. We have new Medicare premiums coming along in 2016. Most people are protected against any Medicare Part B premium increase, but some unfortunate souls, those newly retiring and very high income people, are going to pay a lot more in premiums than the rest. We also have new plans offering Medicare wraparounds, so that if you're in the health plan and also have Medicare Parts A and B, you pay nothing for hospital or doctor bills. So there's a lot of opportunities for saving bucks by smart choice among plans, and we have a large range of inexpensive plans this year, which can save most families $1,000 or $2,000 or even in some cases $3,000 a year.
Well, let me get to that. You told Federal Times that some HMOs might be a good deal this open enrollment season. How so?
Well, a lot of them are always a good deal.
Yeah.
The Kaiser plans seem always to lead the pack. Care First, HMO standard option, Aetna Open Access standard option. But this year, the Care First plans, there are 3 of them, all offer this Medicare wraparound. So if you're an annuitant with Medicare Parts A and B, there's some spectacular savings you can get.
Now let's get back to Self+1 that you talked about. It's another option that requires some investigation. The Washington Post reports it works best for some people, but can cost more than family coverage. Why?
There's a complicated formula that determines how these premiums are calculated, and there's also the factor that if a plan doesn't have as many people with Medicare in it as some other plan, it's, old folks cost a lot more, and if Medicare isn't paying first, they really cost a lot more. So it depends on the plan, but you got to be a little bit careful. You can't assume Self+1 will always save you money. You really have to check the premiums. For example, Kaiser standard option, Self+1 saves. Kaiser high option, it costs you a little more than the family option.
And did the budget deal have any impact on the FEHB?
Not direct, but the indirect effect on people who have Medicare and FEHB was huge, because they faced just a gigantic premium increase, and the budget deal let about 2/3 stay right where they are at $104.90 a month.
Now that's a good follow-up that I want to ask you. Most employees will log in, choose the exact same plan as last year and move on. Is that the right approach?
It's dead wrong, okay?
Okay.
Choosing a health plan is sort of like going to the dentist to have a tooth pulled. No one wants to think about it or do anything about it or read those horrible details. That's one reason Checkbook's guide, is such a handy tool for people. We try to simplify that choice. But if you don't investigate one way or another, talking to your coworkers, talking to your neighbors, getting online at OPM or at our website, and check out plans that can save you money, you are making a terrible error. The couch potatoes who just stay in the same plan year after year, decade after decade, are wasting a ton of money.
Good advice. Open enrollment runs now through December 14th. Walton Francis, economist and policy analyst. Thanks again, Walt.
Thank you.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. The Wall Street Journal reports the world's largest drone manufacturer, DJI, unveiled new software this week. It uses geofencing to restrict drones from flying near sensitive areas. It's a welcome advance for an industry poised to take off, whether regulators like it or not. Jonathan Bloom has more on the latest advances in unmanned aerial systems.
If you have to ask what all the buzz is about, you should probably look up.
There are estimates that there are going to be 1 million drones sold this holiday season.
We met Eric Chang 2 years ago when he was building drones out of kits. Now he's signing copies of his new book on drone photography.
There are folks here who just want to get in there and take a picture for fun. There are also folks who want to build their entire business around drones.
And business is what the Drone World Expo is really about.
That's really where the future of drones is going.
Far beyond the joy of flying.
Really, when you're thinking about drones, it's not about the aircraft, it's about the information that's collected.
Like information about crime scenes.
If we can process a crime scene or a traffic accident scene in a matter of minutes as opposed to hours and open up those roadways or those public right-of-ways, that's huge.
With more of these in the sky every day, one big question has become how to keep them from hitting each other, especially with many being flown by beginner pilots and many others soon to be flying themselves.
So you need lanes, you need traffic lights, stop signs and such.
NASA is testing software to create order in the skies.
We want to keep them separated, we want to keep them safe.
They're working with companies like Airware, which builds systems for commercial drones.
What happens when, say, for example, Amazon is trying to deliver your package, but your insurance company is also trying to look at your roof after a storm, and Verizon's also trying to inspect their local tower?
But many drones for amateurs will still be flown by hand.
Right now, it still takes quite a bit of skill to fly them well.
So as the skies get more crowded, many say the best answer is education.
You hear on the news about near misses and people that are flying in fireworks or near airports and in unsafe ways. And it's not, some of these people just don't understand that these toys are aircraft.
In San Jose, Jonathan Bloom, ABC 7 News.
And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.